our entire lives being raised in the LDS Church, we are taught to be missionaries to everyone, to stand on the rooftops and proclaim the truth to the entire world. Just because somebody leaves the LDS Church doesn't mean that the idea of sharing what they believe to be true would instantly shut off.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I grew up in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, and I moved out when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 9 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. If you're interested in just listening in today, we do have our podcast available, and please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Today, we are so excited to be covering the final, it's kind of bittersweet, the final Peter Santenello video on Mormonism. If you have been tuned in with us this whole time, thank you so much.
Yes,
it's been fun to react to every single one of his videos, including our own, which was a little funny. But this is the last one in his Mormonism series, and it's from an ex-Mormon. So this one, we didn't even sneak peek it. Some of the other ones we kind of watched a little bit. And this one I was like, no, let's keep this one really raw. I'm very, excited and also nervous about this one more than the others.
We don't know how this ex-Mormon is going to go about telling his side of the story. Is he going to be super bitter? Is he going to be more neutral? From what angle is he coming from? We don't know yet, because we don't like to bash on people's beliefs. We're a little bit nervous about how this is going to go, but we're hoping for the best, and we will try to chime in and add our little comments along the way.
Yes, and this one, obviously, I was raised mainstream LDS, and for those who don't know, because I think sometimes people ask that or wonder, we have left the LDS Church, but we don't talk about it in this huge negative way. We didn't have negative experiences with the church. It was purely a doctrinal decision for us in what our beliefs lined up with. And so we don't have a lot of that bitter and anger towards it that I feel like when people think, oh, people leave the church and then they're just so angry and they hate it and they this and that. And so for those of you who knew that, sorry to repeat it, for those of you who didn't or thought that we still were in, we always take that as a huge compliment because it means that we don't come across in a negative way towards the LDS Church. And that's our goal with that. So anyway, we'll see what this video has to bring.
Based on the other videos that Peter has done with the people within the fundamentalist Mormon groups and the mainstream Mormon groups, he has chosen people that seem to be fairly neutral. So maybe that's what we'll see here once again, is my best guess. But we're about to find out. So looking forward to it.
Here we go.
Did you ever come to this temple? Yeah, this was quote-unquote my temple growing up.
Mesa, all right.
So what was it like growing up in the church? It was wonderful. I grew up in a congregation, what we call a ward, that was super tight-knit. Back then in Mesa, there was tons of LDS, and our congregation was so concentrated where it only consisted of 4 residential streets. So.
Okay, 2 things. Sorry, we're already we're not even a couple seconds into it. But Arizona has probably the most densely populated Mormon group next to Utah itself. So what he's saying about the fact that there's a lot of LDS people in Arizona, very, very true. And then when he's talking about wards, so congregations, unlike other Christian churches where you kind of go to whatever church feels best or whatever one is I guess a lot of, maybe the Catholic Church or people who are churches that are very large would do the same, where you go to the closest geographical location. That's how it is with the LDS churches. So each ward has boundaries, physical boundaries, and it's very highly encouraged. I won't say mandatory, but it's very highly encouraged. You go to that ward, that wherever you're living, that's the church that you go to at a certain time, at a certain place, and that's how they keep everything organized.
It's recommended to the point, though, that if you're not attending the one you're assigned to, I guess you could say, you will have people asking you why, right?
Yeah.
It's not just do whatever, and no one will ever ask you, hey, why aren't you coming to your ward? And
church leaders, they have your records, too. So your records will be sent to wherever your geographical location is. And so that church leadership will be reaching out and saying, hey, we have your records here. Is there a reason why you're not coming to church here? And it's very rare that you go to church outside that unless it's to visit somebody or something like that.
Yeah, and they draw a geographical line. In some cases, it's fairly rare, but in places like Utah where there are so many church buildings, some people actually have to go to a church building farther away than the closest one to them to get to the one they are technically assigned to. So sometimes that does happen.
That does. And so when he says that there was enough, so wards, they break up these geographical boundaries based on the number of active members that are coming to church. And wards, they typically keep to, I feel like in Utah it was about 300 ish members that are actively going to come to church, right? And then if it got too big and the wards grew to a certain point, they would actually have ward splits, and they would change the geographical location and say, okay, now it's here, so that their congregations always stayed within a reasonable size. So when he says that geographically there's only 4 streets and there's enough members in that to make a full ward, that's a huge deal. That means that pretty much every single person on those 4 streets is going to be LDS to make those 300 members within those 4 streets.
Depending on how long the streets are, but yes.
I guess that's true. If it's going through the whole town.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was densely populated.
Yeah.
Basically, almost every single home in that neighborhood was LDS. When you're 8 years old, the church influences you to decide to become a member. But as an adult, an 8-year-old doesn't have the maturity to make such a decision, nor do you realize what kind of decision you're making. A lot of it is like you're seeing your older siblings or your friends who are members in your ward all get baptized.
Okay.
And so like, that sounds cool. I want to do that.
Sure.
All right,
Okay,
babe.
first controversial topic.
Yes, this is very controversial.
We're gonna
Let's go with our experiences first. What was your experience like? Were you baptized when you were 8 years old?
I was baptized when I was 8 years old. And at that time, you do feel like it is your decision. So I understand his point because hindsight's 20/20, right? And you can say this, that, the other about whether or not 8 years old is old enough to consent to something. However, they normally, when you're raised in the LDS Church, you're going to primary from the time that you're 3. So if you ask, and these 8-year-olds, you go into an interview with the bishop, and he's asking you questions about, it's not so much about worthiness as much as understanding what baptism is, why it's necessary, things like that. And at 8 years old, I could tell you that I knew exactly why I wanted to be baptized, what baptism meant to me, what it meant for my salvation, why I was following the example of Jesus Christ and being baptized. And so as much as it is tradition, and it's not like an 8-year-old is really going to go against their parents, I say that in any religion or any type of way of thinking, at 8 years old, you're going to follow what your parents' way of thinking is. And that's natural and normal no matter what environment you're raised in.
Right.
At 8 years old, you have the beliefs of your parents, right? But in addition to that, when you're raised in the LDS Church, you go to church and you're learning probably so much more than a lot of, I can't say other Christian churches, because people who go to church every Sunday and their kids are going to Sunday school every single week, they're going to have a vast amount of knowledge instilled in them from a very young age as to why they're doing what they're doing. So,
but at 8 years old, going to the LDS Church, you're being taught a lot of why it's important to be baptized.
Yes.
So you're saying you felt like you knew why.
I felt like I knew why, and I 100% at 8 years old, and I would still even say now, I felt like it was still my choice.
Okay, that's was going to be my next question. Did you feel like at any point after being baptized, when you got a little bit older, that you thought, oh, I really didn't know what I was doing or what I was getting into?
No, 100%. I felt like I knew what I was getting into. Again, as an adult and as an outsider, it goes, that's crazy that an 8-year-old could make such a big decision. And I understand his perspective. But I think you don't have that perspective until you leave it, because at 8 years old, you are going to do whatever you're taught.
Right. As long as you're still believing in that belief, you think, how grateful am I that I had parents that taught me the importance of being baptized, and how grateful am I that I was baptized into this truth, right? As you would think, right?
Yep. So for you,
well, for me, I was 8 years old and baptized in the LDS Church, so the fundamentalist polygamous group, and it was still the same rule that once you reach 8 years old, you are baptized. But it was also very important. I was taught as a young age that it was very important that you understood why. So I had parents, specifically my mother, that would teach me and just, I mean, man, the amount of time spent of her teaching me why it was important, I felt like, geez, I mean, I could be baptizing people at that point. I felt ready. I felt ready. And I understood it to the point that after I was baptized, I was determined to do no wrong.
No, I was the same way.
Never sin again, because we were taught that at that point, when you were baptized, all of your sins, anything that you had done up to that point, was forgiven, washed away, clean slate. You're ready to go. And I'll tell you what, I was very good at doing my chores. I was very obedient. I was determined to do no wrong. And so I feel like because of that, I had a pretty good understanding, at least in the eyes of my parents and what they believed. I understood what they believed. And so I felt that I made that decision by my own. Of course, highly influenced by my siblings and my older siblings and my parents and all of that.
But I think all choices at 8 years old, all choices are heavily influenced, if not completely influenced, by your parents.
All the way up into your adulthood and on until forever, based on your environment, your decisions are highly affected by your surrounding environment. So I don't think that is uncommon at all.
Yes. And again, I feel like this is something that when you leave the church, you look at it and from an outsider's perspective, and all of you, if you haven't been raised in that environment, it's very easy to recognize that 8 years old is not old enough to consent to an eternal covenant. Okay. Right. So I will acknowledge that. I totally understand it. However, we just want to point out that in the moment and when you're in it, you're not, when he says, okay, well, you're just kind of convinced of it. It's deeper than that for you personally. Even right. At 8 years old, it's deeper than I only want to do it because my older siblings are doing it. Normally, you're taught in a way that you really, truly desire it.
Now swinging to the other side here, because we like to take it from both sides. And so
we're never going to get through this video.
Sorry, this is going to be like a 5-hour video. We'll try to cut it down. To his point, what's his name again? I'm sorry. I already forgot his name. Todd. We'll remember as we hear it more. But to his point, now this is not doctrinal to the Mormon Church at all, but maybe he heard some similar things that I was told from people that had fairly high callings in the church. That at 8 years old, you are covenanting and you are promising to follow God, His commandments, and at that point, this is what I was told, you give up your agency. You had your choice. Your agency was to choose to be baptized and follow the example of Jesus Christ.
You got to say who you were told this by, because that holds more weight.
It does. I was told this by a mission president.
Yeah, when he was on his mission, a mission president told him that
at 8 years old, you choose to follow Jesus Christ, and that was your agency. That was your big decision. And after that point, you no longer had that free agency because you have committed to that. Now you have to do it. So if Todd here heard similar things, that's where you could say, whoa, you're not old enough to make a decision for the rest of your life like that.
100%.
And so anyway, that's just the other side of it. But once again, that's not church doctrine. But it came from someone that was holding a very, very high calling in the church. So as a church member, you're going to respect that, and you're going to look at it as it is truth when it's coming from someone with such a high calling.
Yes. And so, yeah. And obviously, too, like us going around trying to be perfect afterwards when we were 8, I don't know if that kind of pressure and that mentality is necessarily healthy for an 8-year-old either, right? Like we both felt that and we both went through that. I wouldn't want my child to feel that. But it doesn't mean that in our circumstances, being raised in it, that we thought that was hard or bad for us to have.
No.
And I don't feel like there was any harm being done by me being baptized when I was 8. No harm was done to me by having that tradition. Same with in the Catholics, like if you get baptized as a baby, do you grow up and you're like, wow, because I was baptized as a baby, against my own consent, against my own will. I don't know. Catholics, leave in the comments whether or not you feel like something was taken away from you because you weren't old enough to make that full decision for yourself. Or is it something that is a tradition? It's a tradition. It is a commitment to your family's faith. And
that's
harmless.
That's what you have to remember too, is it's parents doing it because they feel that is what is best for you. It will save you. It will help you. However you want to look at it, it's parents trying to do the best they can for their children. You cannot complain about that.
Yep, and you can't blame them for that. Or at least we don't feel like you should.
If that's what they truly believe, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then with Mormonism, there's always a progression. There's always the next thing. So the church gives you roles early on in life, especially for boys. When I was young, the expectation was to go on a mission when you're 19 years old. You spend 2 years doing that. Roadmap after that is then you get married. And this is the place you get married, is a temple. What the church does is it creates a roadmap for you. It's all planned out. So
you did all those steps. You
did all those steps.
You did your mission.
Yep,
you came back, got married.
Got married. So we I can't help but say I say the word we sometimes, but I served in Taiwan. So I lived in Taiwan for 2 years. Learned Chinese.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
I say we all the time when I'm referencing the church. Even though we no longer attend church, That's
why so many people ask, are you guys active?
It's probably because I say we all the time when I'm talking about Mormonism. I feel like you can take the person out of Mormonism, but you can't take the Mormonism out of the person.
Yeah, to some extent, for sure.
To some extent, for sure. So, and when he talks about a roadmap, I mean, we're taught that that's such a huge blessing to have a roadmap, to have
a direction
to go in your life and understand your purpose. And from a very young age, like when I taught, well, I didn't teach primary. I was the chorister for primary for 4 years. So I was in charge of teaching the children in the wards the songs. And the songs would always go along with principles and messages that we wanted the children to learn, right? But like having that guidance and the footsteps to be able to follow and to follow in Christ's example, as well as following what we believe is Christ's church. Again, we believe is Christ's church. Having that roadmap is considered the biggest blessing in your life, to know what God wants you to do and how to safely return back to Him was always something I enjoyed as a child and adult.
It's true though. I mean, this roadmap that he's talking about is very true. You grow up, you get baptized, and then you serve a mission at 19. Now it's 18. That age has changed, and it's 19 for the girls now, right?
Yeah.
So 18 for the boys, 19 for the girls to serve missions. And then to his point, once you return from your mission, getting married is the number one priority. Yes.
Yeah. And there are lots of steps too in between those big steps. Those are kind of the big steps. There are lots of steps like receiving the priesthood for boys. There are special medallions and things that you can earn in young women's as a young girl, and there's all these extra things to be able to help keep you on what they would call the covenant path. And I believe even we received something recently for the primary in our current ward. And I think they even said that that's like the theme is how to keep children on the covenant path. That's what they're calling it as well. The church is calling it the covenant path.
Following the
it's from one covenant.
It's
one covenant to the next, right? Yep. A covenant being a two-way promise with God. You make that at baptism. You make that when you get your endowments taken out, when you serve a mission in the temple, ordinances and covenants, and then again in sealing. So that's what it's called.
That's a good point you make there. Before serving a mission, girls or boys, they attend the temple. Before that. Yep.
Lots of challenges, but I love the experience. And years after that, it's these steps right here. Perfect timing in our walk here.
Yeah.
Where this is the entrance to the temple. Traditionally at this temple is family gathers right here. And so when the ceremony is done, the bride and groom comes out those gold doors, and it's a big celebration. Doing these things leads to happiness, and the goal of it all is to return to our Father in heaven in the celestial kingdom, which is another way of saying like the top level of heaven. You must do all those things, from being baptized, doing the rituals in the temple, then being married in the temple and living a good, clean life and doing all the things.
Okay.
Lots of work your entire life.
Sure.
And your hope is that you qualify to dwell with your Father in heaven or God.
I was just going to ask, where's all the people?
I know that couple. Funny. You just, in Mormonism, and I say that in a loving way, everyone knows everyone. It's been 4 years since we left the church. Time heals wounds, and so it used to be very raw and just painful. I want to emphasize that it's a painful experience, leaving such what it looks like a happy, joyful, very fulfilling life.
I'm glad he mentions that it is painful. And also I want to emphasize what people mean when they say the word leaving the church, because it means a lot. It's very different within mainstream Mormonism than what it was for like Sam in the FLDS. So for Sam, leaving the church meant leaving
family, friends, home, everything, work, job, all that stuff was left behind.
Yeah, it meant like a physical removal, right? So, and that's how it is in a lot of polygamous groups within Mormonism, where it's this physical removal. I have to remove myself from this place, from these people, from this family, all those type of things. Within mainstream Mormonism, when we say leave the church, or even when I say that Sam and I, have left the church, all that means is that you choose to no longer believe the church doctrines. And that is leaving. It's more of a spiritual leaving than what it is a physical one. Although I can say maybe the physical part of leaving is that you're no longer attending church meetings.
Right.
That would be considered leaving. So you're not leaving your community. You're not leaving your home. You don't even have to leave the church in a way as in like taking your records out. Like,
there's many different levels of leaving too.
That's true.
Like there's people that become less active is the first step, right? Less active, meaning they attend once in a blue moon. Maybe they go to some of the activities in the church, but they're not always there for everything. The ones that are really strong and active, those are the ones that are there for every church meeting, there for every activity. And then you have so you have active, and then you have less active.
Less active would be, and there's actually like a certain number of times that they have to take your role in church in order for you to be considered a less active and an inactive member.
Right. So I believe if you are going to church once
a month,
you're considered less active.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you start going less than that, then you're inactive. And we taught a lot of inactive people on my mission in Chile, trying to get people to come back to church. So, and there's inactive people, but they're not really saying that I no longer belong to the church if they're inactive. I mean, they can, but not necessarily. Like they could still claim to be members of the church. They're still, I still go to church. I still belong to the church, but they're just not attending.
And a lot of times you'd hear people in those situations, they'll be like, I feel like the church doesn't fit in with my life right now. Things like that. You'll hear things like that. And we've had people that have tried to tell us like, well, can't you just say that it's not for you right now? We're like, well, that's not why we quote unquote left, right? Like that's not our position in just, it's just not for us right now. And maybe we'll go back to church later. That's not our circumstance, but that is also common, right? And
that was a common thing to say in the mission field as well. As missionaries, we would go up to someone and say, hey, I haven't seen you around for a while. And they'd be like, oh, we're no longer members of the church. And we would say, oh, yeah, you are. You're on our record right here. You're members, right? And I don't know that was a very respectful thing to say to them or not, depending on where they felt that they were at that time. But so that leads to the next step. People that don't want to be associated in any way and never hear from the church again, they can actually get their name removed from the record of the church. And that is when you become a non-member. Like officially in the records and everything, you're no longer a member.
Yes. And that's considered a pretty big deal to make that full separation from the church.
Yeah.
And you actually have to do it through a lawyer to go and get your record removed.
It's a big deal.
I will say that getting baptized at 8, that is what creates your record with the church. So there's 2 different kind of records. When you bless a baby in the church, they're like on the records as they're the children of people typically who are members. And then, but once they're 8, if they're not baptized, then that blessing record kind of goes away. not goes away, but like they're not going to invite your children to primary or things like that. Like at 8, it's either you're like getting baptized and your name's going to be on the record and you're like officially in the records of the church, or you're not, and they then would consider you a non-member.
But that's completely a decision made by the parents.
Yes.
And then of course the child. But the parents have to be okay with it in order for their child to be baptized, right? Like the church
approval.
looks for that consent, right? They don't just go, no one's going to come into your house and snag your child and be like, baptize, you're 8 years old, you got to go. No. It's not like that. Another way to get your records removed from the church, or your name removed from the church records, is to be excommunicated. And that is to go against the church in some way. There's different reasons that would be caused, but fighting against the church, teaching
sexual impurity,
teaching false doctrine about the church, things like that. You could actually receive a letter from church headquarters, or I'm not exactly sure how that works.
It's a whole process, actually. So they can't just send you a letter that says like, okay, now you're excommunicated.
Right.
From what I understand, they have councils that they would invite you and say, okay, well, now you have to go to the disciplinary council, and then you go.
But that first letter would come from headquarters, right? Saying that you need
to go.
disciplinary council,
I think
or would you hear from local?
I think it's from a stake level. But yeah, you have a disciplinary council within your like local, I wanted to say government, that's not the right word, local leadership. And then you would go there and they would kind of talk to you about why you said the things you said or did the things you did, and whether or not you want to repent for those things, and what that process would look like, and whether or not. Anyway, so there's a lot to excommunications, but it's a very big deal to be excommunicated, because the church cutting ties with you rather than you cutting ties with the church is a whole different ball game. And yeah, people that have gone through it can tell you that it's a pretty awful experience.
The biggest two categories would be the active members of the church and the inactive members of the church. Those are going to be the two main categories of people that still have their records on the church, in the church records.
Yeah, exactly. And then him saying that it is very painful. Again, because most of leaving the church, or even just choosing to become inactive, meaning that you're not going to church anymore, especially when it comes down to it's because of your belief system, that is very painful. Mostly because, like we said, there's a very clear path on how to get back to Heavenly Father. And within Mormonism, it's believed that the LDS Church has the clear and the one straight and narrow path. Way back to God. And if it's not that path, then you can't return back to Him. And these other paths might be good, like other Christians might have good paths, but they can't actually get you all the way back to living with God.
Right.
No other religion can. It's the one and only true religion that has the full path all the way back to Him. And so because of that, leaving that, no matter how much you disagree with certain doctrines or know in your heart that you don't believe certain things within the church, if you've been taught that your whole life, that that's the only way to get to God, it's going to be painful for that to dissolve and for you to rebuild what your new path looks like. Because when you've always had that guidance, not having it anymore is absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah. It was interesting for me because I was born into that one and only right path back to God. And then I found a different path and jumped out and jumped into the other path. People ask me, and it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting thing that happens when you know something so full-heartedly, and then you realize, or you learn something new, you learn something more, and you completely switch that mindset. It is very difficult, I will say. Coming from the FLDS at age 18, it took a long time to finally realize, that's not what I want. That's not the truth. And then I joined the mainstream LDS Church, and once again felt like I had the one and only true path back to God. So, that's a whole other video about how my mind worked and how that actually came about, and how I could go about that direction. Life is an interesting thing. You're constantly learning. You're constantly growing. At least I hope. That's what you can hope, is that you're always learning and growing. But yeah, it's just a very painful process to come to the realization that something you knew so full-heartedly might not be the only truth.
And people think that because we went on our spiritual journey path together, which we're super lucky to have gotten to do that together, they think that a lot of times our reasoning would be the same. I always explain it as like, we always knew the pages that each other were on and we were in the same book, but our reasoning and our pages were still completely separate. And like Sam said, his experience already having left a religion before was completely different than me, where I had been in the same religion my whole life up to the point of our faith transition.
Yep.
So for him, some of those processes, they just look different. It looked different for him to leave.
Absolutely.
And I'd say even the heartbreak and stuff was a little bit different. And maybe, I mean, I don't want to say that my pain ran a little bit deeper with the LDS, but I feel like the disappointment.
I would agree with that.
Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yeah. Because, I mean, I had already kind of experienced that before, of knowing. I would say leaving the FLDS at age 18 ran a lot deeper for me.
Yeah.
Because, when you're raised and you're taught your entire life, like you said, then you are 1,000% in and convinced of it.
Yeah.
And anyway, so.
And that's how go ahead.
Not to say that leaving the LDS Church was easy by any means for me, but it was just a different process.
Yeah, and for me it was like very earth-shattering, very, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get the left LDS story because a lot of people reached out to me.
Okay.
A lot. And they said, hey, look, if you're going to do an LDS series, a lot of people have left. You really need to get that perspective. So fair enough. I want to get that perspective. But I've also noticed there's no one story for left LDS. Like,
absolutely.
I've heard everything from burn it all down to, I left and I still hang out with all my Mormon friends and family and everything's cool. I mean, the two extremes.
And everything in between.
And everything in between.
Right. I can't emphasize this enough. I was 100% in it from birth until, 4+ years ago. When you feel that you have lost something, it's devastating and it's painful, and there's all the emotions are valid. Anger, resentment, sadness, and for those who left the church who feel that, I respect it. Oftentimes, you lose friend associations. Oftentimes, your family will treat you differently. And I don't think Mormons do it overtly or on purpose, but it's kind of how they're been indoctrinated. The church leaders pin us as others. Like President Nelson, I think it was almost a year ago in General Conference, called people like me a lazy learner. That's not very nice, right? And then just recently in conference, the most recent conference, he likened a person like myself as do not take advice from those who don't believe. The people who leave, they quickly realize that the love that they had from their parents or their siblings was conditional. The condition of love and being family was being a full, worthy, prosperous member of the church.
Obviously, you're totally right about the extremes. There is such an extreme. I'd say the extremes, where people end up when they come out of it, typically comes down to their reasoning for why they came out of it.
Right. And
it can be anything from, some of you might be like, why would they want to burn it down, right? If someone is sexually abused by a church leader and the church doesn't handle it properly, right? People are going to be angry and they have every right to be, and they might want to burn it down. Then there's people who leave. I'm just trying to give some examples so people can understand where different people come from, right? There might be someone who realized that the lifestyle isn't what they want. It's not doctrines or anything. They're just like, the lifestyle and the rules just don't work for how I want. Yeah. And they might leave and they're just going to go live their lives and they're not going to really care about anything. There's all sorts of there's no one story. No. And because I feel like too, a lot of times within the LDS Church, there is the mold and everybody has a different reason for why they join the church. But once they join the church, because everybody is supposed to be on such a specific path, a lot of those times you end up talking to members. Like Peter could have interviewed a lot of different LDS people. Yeah. And even the family, the dinner, and with Brock, right? Both of those were great examples. And they both had very similar things to say because the church has a very limited and very particular view on the world and on life. Mm-hmm. And so there's not really a lot of space to veer off from that. So you're going to get very similar answers. And when it comes to talking to people who have left the church, it is the exact opposite. There is a plethora of reasons. And now people can also go in so many different directions because if you spent all your life on the straight and narrow path, and now there's the rest of the whole world and a million other paths to explore, you can find ex-Mormons on every single path in life, from the deepest, darkest holes to the most prosperous, beautiful family. Like, there's everything. And so I feel like it is,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people that you will talk to will just say, oh, I just don't want to go anymore. I just don't think that it's for me, right? And then you have the other extreme, like you said, and that other extreme, a lot of people like to hate the extremists. Mm-hmm. Because they say, why, when you leave, do you have to become so bitter, right? You and I are fortunate enough to not have to or need to feel that way. But there are certain circumstances where people have the right to be bitter, right?
Yeah.
We try to before we start judging everyone for their decisions and the way they go about things, you need to understand where they're coming from first, right? I feel like a lot of times it's easy to jump to conclusions, jump to this, jump to that. Nobody knows what that other person has been through fully unless they are that person.
Yeah.
And so it's not right to instantly assume that everyone that leaves a religion or a church is going to automatically become haters of the church and that they aren't validated in that if they do become haters of the church. Now, that being said, once again, some people take it even so far to the extreme that they come across that everyone within that religion or within that church are these bad people.
They're not willing to reciprocate any sort of respect.
Right. So the person that is leaving needs to also try to find that understanding that there's a lot of different people within that religion. Not all of them are going to treat you the way that other people treated you within that religion. So
I feel like it's very similar to the FLDS.
Yeah.
Okay, you have people like Sam who leave the FLDS, and he did have a good childhood. He left because of the lifestyle, not because he didn't believe doctrine, even though later he chose to not believe it, right? Yep. He left because of the lifestyle. He has no bitterment or resentment towards the church, but he can still look at it and say, I don't believe that that's a church that leads back to God. Right. And I think that the church leaders are doing this, that, or that. Like, he can understand that and also say, I had a good experience while I was in it, and I chose to leave it for these reasons, and not have the bitterness. The people, and you guys have seen many interviews on our channel of people who were abused, people who were hurt, and the way that they resent and feel sad and hurt and angry and want to rip every single person out of the FLDS and in their minds save them all from this religion, they are completely valid. They are just as valid in those feelings as what Sam is in the fact that he had a good experience. Mm-hmm. Both of those experiences can be valid. Right. And within the LDS Church, both of those experiences can also be valid. There's people who had such horrible experiences, either with people in the church, leadership in the church doctrine itself, whatever that taught, that are so horrible that they deserve the right to be angry and feel like they want every person out of the church. And then there can be people like us who didn't have horrible experiences, felt like our experience within the LDS Church was a net positive and good, and we left for doctrinal reasons, and we just said, oh, we don't believe these same doctrines that the LDS Church does. Therefore, we're not going to prescribe to that religion anymore, and we have no hard feelings, and we're just fine with people being in the church. Both of those are valid.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of times, because the LDS Church is so big, people don't want to validate both sides of that. You know, when you're looking at a small religion like the FLDS, it's easy to just be like, oh, I understand why they'd hate that. So just something to remind everyone to just be kind, and that to understand that people's experiences are their own and that that's okay. And on this note, there was one other thing that you made me think of. When you're in the LDS Church and you're raised in the LDS Church, and I was talking to, it was actually my mom recently, and she's still active in the LDS Church. She had a family friend that, our family friends are very strong within the church, and they had one son who left and is very outspoken against the church. And, my mom was just saying, this child is breaking my friend's heart with how much he is going against the church. And I told her, I said, our entire lives being raised in the LDS Church, we are taught to be missionaries to everyone, to stand on the rooftops and proclaim the truth the truthfulness of the gospel to the entire world.
Not physical rooftops.
Not physical rooftops, just
metaphorically.
Metaphor. to proclaim that and to share that all the time. If anyone has members of the church as friends, you'll see on they're encouraged on their social media pages to proclaim the gospel and to share. Just because somebody leaves the LDS Church doesn't mean that the idea of sharing what they believe to be true would instantly shut off.
Right.
You don't stop feeling that need to share the truth. Now, if their truth is no longer what someone who's in the church's truth is, the people who are in the church are going to feel very much attacked. Mm-hmm. But they have to remember that they were taught that from a young age. And so to not try to spread what they believe to be true now would go against everything that they have been raised to believe.
Right. Coming from both sides, if someone is sharing something that they believe to be a fact as the ultimate and only truth, whether it's someone that is left and they're trying to tell people that are still in it, or someone that's in it and trying to tell people that don't have this blessing as they would think, it can come off very hurtful from either side if it is taught in a way that I have it, you don't.
Yeah.
And it's not the way we go about things, obviously, but at the same time, we understand where both people are coming from. I'm just trying to bless the lives of others around me. I'm trying to save people that are stuck in this, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think that any of those two people are going to get anywhere with their, message if it's coming across as I have it, you don't. This is the only way. You don't have it. That type of mentality. I
think Peter did a good job in the video with Brock, and I can leave a link to our review of that video because Brock is a great example in light of, a typical member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I think at one point Peter said, if someone who is Muslim came and tried to convince you to convert to that, would you be open to it? Do you think that they could convert you? And Brock, of course, was like,
of course not.
Of course not. Like, I'm too firm in my faith, right? To do that. And then Peter asked, then why would you go and try to convert somebody who's Muslim into yours? What makes you think that their faith, And I think that kind of goes along with even ex-Mormons, When you were in it, it's unlikely that somebody that was an ex-Mormon came and convinced you and dragged you out of it. Very unlikely. That pretty much almost never happens, I would say, that somebody was convinced out of religious beliefs, right? It is a personal spiritual journey that can grow either way, right? Same with being convinced and becoming a member of the church, of the LDS Church. It's not just, someone just came and they convinced me. No, they have to have their own experiences. They have to have their own time. They have to have the right knowledge. Like, it's all this culmination of all these experiences for people to join or to leave a religion.
Right. Yeah.
And unfortunately, some families feel that they lost their son or daughter forever because that's what the doctrine teaches. And so there's this irreparable thing where they lost you. And the church will kind of emphasize that, like, you need to move on. And we have pity for those who leave. And again, there's going to be some members that will be upset with me saying that, but that's the truth. And that's from the people that I've associated with who left. It's happened to some of them. Again, not all, but to some of them. And these criticisms that are are real and true that members today hear, they take personal offense to it. Like they think it's a personal attack on them.
Okay.
And this message that we have is to the system, to the church, to the top leaders.
I think it's also the same, again, just comparing to the FLDS, right? A lot of times the members feel like they're being attacked when people say things about the church. And most of the time, especially we try to direct it to the leaders and say the people are good and the leaders in the church are the problem, right? Within the FLDS.
Right. Well, once again, you can't say that as a blanket statement, though. I mean, there are always going to be people within every organization that are not good, right? But the overall view of things is the people within the religions are trying to live the way they were taught, trying to live good lives, and it is the leaders that are ultimately controlling that.
Yeah.
This is my high school. This is Mesa High. This structure here I've literally never seen before. It's brand new. So there are constant improvements. Majority of my friendships were LDS kids. I had many that weren't, but that's just kind of how you're taught. You stay with those who have the same values. This is the seminary building. So most schools in Arizona and Utah, Idaho, I'm guessing for sure, 1 hour a day, LDS students would cross the street and receive spiritual education or instruction.
During the school day?
During the school day.
The school was okay with that?
Yeah, they called it release time. You sign a little waiver that you can leave campus to go to seminary.
So obviously by design, the church set this up as close as they could to the school.
Yeah, in smaller towns where there's not that many high school kids, the trade-off is kids will go to a local church house that's nearby or even go to a member's home if it's a really small group. There's an expectation that you graduate from seminary. And so that's the expectation of a young LDS person.
Yes, I went to seminary all 4 years. As a matter of fact, my last year I was being a nanny, my senior year of high school, and I did homeschool seminary for that period of time. Yep. So I worked in my workbook and then went back and had to go have meetings with the seminary teachers to make sure I was doing everything so that I could graduate from seminary.
And you were really in it too, if I remember right.
Yes. So I was going to say in Utah, you could varsity letter. Like, in sports, varsity, you could varsity letter in seminary. And yes, I was that person. And I did varsity letter the 3 years that I was like in the buildings. And then when I did the homeschool, it wasn't really like as possible, if I remember right. But I didn't that senior year because I wasn't at the high school anymore. But I did those first 3 years. Yep, I totally varsitied in religion classes. So
yeah. And so so when you were at seminary, because I didn't experience this, when you were at seminary, what were the other kids doing during that time?
So other kids just got to take more credits. So you kind of had the expectation. I mean, in Utah schools, they really made sure that you were able to get the credits in to still graduate, even while missing a period. But it was something that was taken into consideration. Other kids would have that extra period to be able to go towards their high school credits to graduate.
Okay, so you were getting less credits than them because you were going to seminary, right?
Yep.
Like the seminary didn't credit to anything in your high school experience.
No. The state couldn't give credits for, like, it didn't go on our high school transcript at all.
Okay.
It was basically, like he said, a release time where we were just released. And in Utah, a lot of times they're in a parking lot.
In the same parking lot, yeah.
So not even across the street like this. Like at my high school, it was in the same parking lot as the school. And so it was like a big sidewalk between the school and the seminary building. So you didn't even have to cross the street.
So in seminary, is it all Mormon doctrine? Is that what's being taught?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and by that, I mean like every year. So each year of high school, you have 4 years of high school. Each year you studied a different scripture. So Bible, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price.
The four main ones.
Yeah, the 4 main ones. And so every year, and then it would just like rotate so that no matter what, by the time you were done with high school, you'll have gone through each 4 of those. And then so you have your normal lessons. It's pretty typical. It's similar to Sunday school, but I would say that it's a lot more fun and geared towards teenagers. So there were always like the really cool the cool seminary teachers that would like make it really relatable and fun. You'd have like certain activities and stuff. They definitely try to make it more engaging than like Sunday school in church.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, what I did experience, and I don't know if he will mention this or not, is Institute.
Yep, which is seminary for when you're in college.
Yeah, so once I returned from my mission and went to college, I did go to Institute, and that was my experience. But that was a lot different, I think. I mean, most people attending the Institute classes were already married or seriously dating someone and about to be married or something like that. So it was a very different experience, I would think, than what seminary was.
Yeah, I went to Institute a little bit. We went to the same college, and that Institute building was in the parking lot of the college as well.
Right.
So it's, again, in Utah, very closely tied, closely related. Within high school, too, so you had like the normal lessons if you're just going and on the roll and making sure you're there for your release time. It's just normal, and you can graduate that way. They did have the graduation, though, mostly came down to attendance, but if I remember, I feel like we got grades a little bit. I have to remember that. I don't know, because again, I varsitied. So to get like your varsity letter in it, you had to go above and beyond. So like every year I had to memorize, I want to say it was 35 scripture passages.
Wow.
I had to
Do you still remember those?
Oh goodness, a lot of them. If
Wow.
the scripture starts, I can almost always finish them. So within the Bible, there was like 35 Bible verses that I had to have completely memorized. You had to read through the entire book from cover to cover. And then you had like other requirements that you had to do. So it was a pretty extensive list to be able to letter in those.
You read through the Bible from cover to cover?
Yeah.
That's a lot of reading.
Yeah. Never mind. So it was Old Testament, New Testament, because now I'm remembering.
Okay, so they split
those up. It was Old
up.
Testament, New Testament, and Book of Mormon, and then Doctrine and Covenants and Pearl of Great Price were 1 year. Because the only one that I didn't finish reading through all the way was the New Testament, because it was my senior year and I was off nannying and went to college early. And so with not being in the high school, I still graduated from seminary, but it wasn't the same level. So yeah, that was the only one I think I didn't finish. But yes, Old Testament. Most importantly, yes, I made it cover to cover Old Testament when I was like 15 years old.
Right.
And Book of Mormon, obviously, multiple times, because they want you to read that as you're reading the other scriptures as well. You're always supposed to be reading the Book of Mormon.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I know what you're all thinking. Are we ever going to get through this video? No, I'm just
Probably
kidding.
not.
What you're actually thinking is, what about the teachers in seminary and institute? How did they get that? That is actually a job, a paid job, paid by the church for these teachers to be there teaching the children.
And a
or
lot
the
of people
adults.
want it. A lot of people want it. It's hard to be able to become a seminary or an institute teacher.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Do you know if they get paid well? I don't remember.
Entry level is just okay, but the more education you get, the more, because I knew that like the favorite seminary teacher that everybody loved in my high school, like he got his master's degree, and the more education you get, the more you get paid. So like he was going to school at the same time. Institute gets paid more. Normally that feeds in from seminary.
Yeah.
So like your base is going to be the seminary teachers, and then they work themselves up to like a seminary principal, and then they go to institute, and then they can work up into the institute. So I'd say similar to like a teacher, honestly.
Yeah, okay.
So
If I'm not mistaken, I ended up with an institute teacher that was your seminary teacher.
yeah, I think I remember that.
So, and I think he
such
was
great
one of your
people.
favorites as well.
Yeah,
So,
he was.
Anyway, that was interesting to see. I mean, it was later in institute, but it was the same person that I guess had graduated from seminary. Anyway, that was
And you
fun.
grow like pretty close bonds to your seminary teachers. Again, a lot of them, in order to be a seminary teacher, you really have to have the personality of like working with the youth. A lot of them are really cool people. They're making the gospel very relatable to you, which is really cool. And then, yeah, I don't know, there's just this like deeper connection with them than a lot of times than your church leaders too, because they don't live in your neighborhood. So like when you go to church and you're going to Sunday school and young women's, like they're your mom's friends, they're your
Right.
parents' friends, they're in your neighborhood, they're your best friend's mom. Like, I don't know, there's a lot of connection. So a lot of kids take a lot of refuge in like going to the seminary buildings and talking. If you had struggles or problems or questions,
About
a lot of
the-
times
about the
the church,
yeah.
you would go to your seminary teachers. I'd say they were also more open to questions, because
Yeah.
they like encouraged kids to ask questions, because they're really trying to help kids get ready for missions a lot
Yeah.
of the time. So a lot more open to questions and stuff. Anyway, that's a long explanation of
Moving
seminary.
on. Now you actually are thinking, are we ever going to finish this?
You go to class, they have tests, but I thought they were easy because you know the material really. And you do all the things and you
Oh yeah, there were
go to a
tests. See,
graduation
we got
ceremony,
grades.
and you get a certificate. And here's the thing, that everything that I'm talking about, from the temple work to going to seminary, is by design. Like, the church's emphasis on kids is so important that from birth till they become adults, they want them to stay. They want, and I'm gonna use this word, but it's indoctrinate. Indoctrinate the kids at a young age, all the way through high school, so that they will be members for life. And it's a important mission of the church.
Indoctrination normally has such a negative connotation with it, like, oh, they're being indoctrinated. But anybody who is in the church, like, teaching your children and rearing them in righteousness is something that all the scriptures say all the time, right? That your job as a parent is to teach your children in righteousness. So if you are a parent within the church, in your mind, you have all these resources and tools to help teach your children and rear them in righteousness.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of members leaving, and this is the next generation, and they have to pass that baton to them or to somebody. So they're putting all their eggs in that basket.
So Todd, the time has finally come. The big question, why'd you leave? Why does one leave at the age of, say, 42, 43 is when you left?
Yep, about that. So I think everyone's different in their journey, but for me, it came out to be truth claims. So growing up, you're taught a certain narrative of how church history, how it was, and I learned later in life that the story was very, very different. And then with that, what became very problematic with how things really were, how the church came to be. And it's starting with Joseph Smith and his first vision, as the church calls it, where he was visited by God the Father and Son Jesus Christ. We were told a certain story or narrative of that, but reality, it was very different. And then things like the Book of Mormon.
Or was it? No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot of theories about what that was like, but Joseph Smith himself did tell multiple different sides of the story, which lead people to wonder what was the actual first vision like, because there are a lot of different views and stories on that.
Well, and if anybody wants to look this up, because this is totally, I mean, I'm sure, because Truth Claims is this guy's thing, which would have been my guess because of how, like, even keel he is about things.
Right.
That would have been my guess as to his reasoning. And then that's similar for us. So I will just tell you that if you have been like, I didn't know there was any other version of the first vision at all, you can find that out on LDS.org, or I think now it's churchofjesuschrist.org.
Most likely.
LDS.org still works. Anyway, on their website, you can go and look up. There are 5 recorded versions of the first vision. I've personally read through them all. I would encourage anybody who's wondering, like, what is he even talking about here? You can go and read them. They are differing. 2 of them are actually written by Joseph Smith. The other 3 are like scribes writing or people retelling the story. So you can go through and read those for yourself and see what you think and see whether or not it is similar or different.
I would say most people probably don't know there are different views on the first vision.
I did not know that. All growing up in the church, again, varsity lettering in seminary, going to institute, going to church every single day, I had no idea that there were different versions at all until about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that was something that was a little shocking. I was like, what? But I was grateful that at least I could just find documents. You can find them right on the church website and you can read through them for yourself.
Yeah.
How the Book of Mormon came to be. The church taught that an ancient prophet named Moroni buried the plates in upstate New York, near where Joseph Smith was raised. Book of Mormon stories occurred somewhere in South America or Central America, and he traveled thousands of miles with super heavy plates to New York. There's that, and then the way that the Book of Mormon was translated was very interesting. we were told as members that he was given what's called a Urim and Thummim, and the way that it was depicted in like church art was compared him to spectacles or glasses. But the reality was, or is, that he, Joseph Smith, used a rock in a hat to translate the Book of Mormon. So literally he would put a stone in a hat, like an Abraham Lincoln type hat, and stick his head in the hat, and words would appear on the stone of what the golden plates would say.
Okay.
Oftentimes the plates weren't even in the room where Joseph and his scribe was translating. So then you ask the question, well, why were the plates even needed after all if he actually didn't use them?
Okay, so I'm not going to pause for every single one of the, well, I might actually, I can't lie. So
no promising there.
No promises there. I will say, so all of these different things, for those of you who are on the outside and just have, don't have any connection or ties to Mormonism, it's easy to look at even the stories that the church had originally, or that you hear and be like, that just sounds crazy that he found golden plates, but when you're raised in it, you believe that so wholeheartedly. And what he's talking about are things that now the church is trying to be more transparent in.
Right.
But a lot of these huge people leaving in waves from the church, a lot of it is because if you've been raised, like myself, I'm a good example of this. If you've been raised your whole life and you feel like you know the doctrine so well and you've been sharing it and preaching it to others, and then you find out that there's these huge things, like huge important details and stories that you were never told, you feel lied to. And that's the problem with it. It's not even like if you had been taught, when he's talking about the seer, it's called the seer stone.
Yep.
And the church has come out. The church actually has pictures of Joseph Smith's seer stone. You can go and look it up on the church website, what it looks like, how it was used to translate, all of that. If I had been taught that starting at 3 years old, like I was about the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate and the spectacles, if I had been taught that all at the same time, it wouldn't be a shock later. Right. And I think now the youth of the church, they're being told all these details that so many people weren't, because so many people left the church over these details.
Right.
So many people said, I've been lied to. They didn't tell me the whole truth. They must be hiding something. It must be sketchy. Therefore, I'm going to leave. And they don't want that to happen with the next generation. So they are becoming more transparent, sharing those type of things that were kind of hidden or pushed into the background before. And we'll see if whether or not that helps or whether or not it continues to hurt. We're not really going to know until probably the next generation, because I think it's people our age that feel like betrayed by that or felt like they were lied to. And so it probably won't be until their kids or their kids have the full transparency, whether or not having that knowledge from the beginning makes it okay, or whether or not they say, hey, a rock and a hat glowing to decide and tell the translation of these plates is too far-fetched for me and my faith, and that still doesn't work. I don't know. I can't be the judge of that, but I feel like for a lot of people, it's just the transparency around it.
Had you were taught about the seer stone, though, right? That it existed, just not that he used it in the way that they are saying now? Or were you not told about the seer stone at all?
I was not told about the seer stone at all. I want to say, I'm trying to remember back because it's been a while since I was in seminary. I believe we heard that Joseph Smith might have had a seer stone, but it being used in any way, shape, or form for the translation of the Book of Mormon I was absolutely not taught any of that.
Yeah.
No. So
yeah, I guess it may have come from the FLDS when I was growing up in the FLDS. That yes, I was familiar with that this seer stone existed, that Joseph Smith had this stone. I was not taught though that he would put it into a hat and look into the hat for the words of what it was saying on the plates. I'm kind of with him here, though. I don't really understand why the plates were necessary if he could ultimately just use the stone and read everything off of the plates.
So from what I was told, do you want the LDS answer to this?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So from what I was told, he did start by translating, by actually looking at the plates with the Urim and Thummim. Mm-hmm. And then after a certain point, he became so in tune with the Spirit and with the book that then he was able to not have to use it anymore.
So after he gained experience
and knowledge made it so that he no longer needed it.
With using the plates at first, and then made it so he didn't need it anymore.
That's what I've been told.
Okay.
Yeah. A funny story, well, I mean, now I have to look back and laugh a little bit, is that I defended the church against this theory years ago. So I had a friend who told me this that wasn't LDS, one of those non-believers that are going to try to make me look silly. And they were like, I had heard that, he used a stone and a hat. And I was like, that is absurd. That's so stupid. You think that we'd really fall for that? Da-da. Anyway, so I was hardcore defending the idea that there's no way we did that. I've never heard of that. And I've been raised LDS my whole life. And that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I was very adamant against it. And so now if that person is watching, I apologize. You were right. I was wrong, but I really did not know. That's how much I didn't know.
And that's the thing too, is I know that I've fought for my beliefs in the past that I was so convinced of, and then later learned, oh no, that wasn't the truth. And so that's why now my stance is the more I learn, the less I know. And I stand by that. I at this point, I don't claim to know the truth fully about anything religious or all of that, because I'm constantly learning more about different religions, different beliefs, and what I believe is changing because of that. So when we've learned the hard way that when you know for sure that what you have is the only truth, later on you can be proven wrong, and that is very hurtful.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the painful experience, right? Whether you feel lied to, whether you feel like it was guilt by omittance, not necessarily they didn't lie to me, they just didn't tell me the whole truth.
Right.
That still hurts pretty deep. And so that adds this certain amount of pain. It's painful even in a faith transition before you make the decision whether or not these truth claims are going to break my faith or if they're going to be faith promoting, whatever they're going to end up being. Yeah. Even before that, no matter what, learning things like that is so hard, and it is painful, and it does feel hurtful.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different problematic things about how that Book of Mormon was translated.
Oh, sorry. I also have sorry. I also have to say though that just because some things are problematic for some people does not mean that's going to be problematic for everyone.
True.
So there are different things, truth claims. I just want to throw that out there because I think he's going to go through a few more truth claims. We've already covered a couple, and that can be completely different. There can be somebody who, I'm just going to throw out an example. In this situation with the seer stone, there are going to be people who say, listen, I already believed that a breastplate and spectacles helped Joseph Smith translate the Book of Mormon. I believe he was a prophet of God, that God spoke directly to him and visited him in person. If he ended up using a seer stone because that's what was easier for him at a later point, why would I have a problem believing that?
Right.
And that's valid.
Yeah.
If you believe all those other things, having a seer stone, there's going to be people who say, how could that make or break your faith? Just as easily as there's people who's going to say, they lied. How could that not break your faith? Either way is perfectly valid in what people choose to believe. It just depends on the person and what's going to hit their heart in certain ways.
Right. And everyone can make sense of things differently, right? Mm-hmm. Based on your personal experience, based on all of that, you can look at certain things and make sense of it or interpret it in a way that either, like you said, could break your faith or make your faith even stronger in certain things, right?
Okay.
And then you ask the question, well, where are those plates today? Can we examine them,
Uh-huh.
But the story is that when Joseph Smith was done, the angel took them back to heaven, I guess. So we don't have a way to validate or
That
verify.
would have been in 1840 something?
I used to know this, but I've been out for 4 years. But I think this was in the 1820s. I think the Book of Mormon came out prior to the church being established, which was in 1830.
Okay.
So in the late 1820s is when the Book of Mormon was published. To kind of put context is
Beautiful
I was going
scenery.
through, life was hard for me. Lots of stress in life. lots of, with having a family and work and church responsibilities, just stressed really greatly, a lot of stress. And so when you find out, like for me, there was more first vision stories, or how it came to be, which doesn't jive with the church's story. It like struck me like, what? And so you're kind of shocked, and so you're like, I'm believing, so I'm going to dig deeper and figure this out, resolve my concerns.
Yep.
And then when that happens is you're going down a rabbit hole, as we say. You think you resolve one thing, but you find another and another issue. And so like you're just neck deep in just mess of things that are true, but you were never taught as a member.
Sound familiar?
It sounds very, very familiar. Rabbit hole is the term that I always use as well. And along with what he's saying, I love that he did mention that the very first thought that you have as a true believing member is because we are taught to search, ponder, and pray. And so the first thing when you find out something is, I feel like when you've been raised in the church, your first instinct is, I'm going to deep dive in this so I can find the answer and have my faith promoted. And I remember just recently looking back, and I'm very glad that through our faith transition, I kept a very good journal. And I remember writing, and I was reading recently, and it was like, I am so excited for these opportunities for Sam and myself to find these answers to our questions. And we are going to come out on the other side of this with such a strong faith and with such a stronger testimony than ever before. And I'm just so excited basically for the opportunity to find answers to our questions that I thought was going to lead to a strong and stronger testimony than we already had.
Right.
And just like he said, that's your first thought when you go into it is, oh, I'm going to dive deep into this and get to the bottom of it and feel even more sure of my testimony.
Yep.
So what's going through your head at this time? Like the further you go into that rabbit hole.
Well, the context is like, I've been a member my entire life.
Yep.
And I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this. And like, it has to be true. Like, it better be true. And like, you're learning these things, and like, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, dude, is it really true? Like, you're like questioning and doubting like crazy. Your mind's going in overdrive. So like, it was crazy. And like, I didn't tell my wife. I was scared to tell her.
Okay.
Because like, when you're a member, and if a spouse leaves, that can break apart your family, because traditionally, in some cases, a wife or a spouse, one spouse is loyal, and they'll leave you. And then there's the dynamic where, in order to get to heaven, you have to be there with your spouse that you're sealed to in the temple. So it's all interrelated and just a complicated web of like requirements and work. And when you lose your testimony, and you have this integrity within yourself, like, I can't be a part of something that isn't true, you fall apart, like, emotionally. That's what happened to me.
How long?
Yeah, I think that's a good description of it. Him not telling his wife is something that's common, I feel like. Unfortunately, because, and this is something, I think the reason that I was so transparent with Sam about my questions. One, I didn't think that that my original questions that I had, I did not think for a second would end up into a huge faith journey transition. I thought it was a very simple question. I still went to Sam with that question in particular because I watched my parents go through this when my dad had a faith transition, and he was afraid to tell my mom about it. And so he didn't say anything to my mom until he completely didn't believe anymore. And so when he told her that he didn't believe any of it, it was the biggest shock, and it did almost tear apart my family.
Yeah.
And even though they're still married now and they're better than ever now, it was a dark period of time for the whole family. Watching my parents' relationship go through that and them almost divorcing, writing up papers for divorce before, and it's just, and deciding they couldn't go through with it. Thank goodness. Thanks, Mom and Dad, if you're watching this. Thanks for not. I'm glad that they were able to work through it. But it is so earth-shattering, because for my mom, if my dad is not a worthy priesthood holder and a worthy member of the church, it meant that she couldn't be in the celestial kingdom with God. And as a woman, you have to be married to a worthy priesthood male. So it threatened my mom's views and ideas of her eternal salvation, and her eternal life with her family was now shattered. How could somebody not emotionally be completely tore up about that? She couldn't just be like, oh, okay, you don't believe it? Sounds good. No, okay, you not believing, not only did you not tell me while you were going through these thoughts and processes yourself, but now you're breaking apart everything that I hold dear for my eternities,
You have to also be understanding of those that fear to tell their spouses.
100%.
Because they are afraid that if they say, hey, I'm having these doubts and questions about my belief, especially if it's a couple that has been through the temple, they made those covenants together, they promised not only with each other, but with God that they would hold true to those covenants till the end of their days, and then beyond into the afterlife, right? So if you are doubting, the last thing you're going to want to do is tell that person that I am starting to believe differently about these things, because you're
100%.
so afraid that it's going to shatter their world.
Exactly.
And destroy them and destroy the relationship that you have with them. And so it's understanding why people wouldn't want to. But my golly, the first question you have, the first doubt you have, try to, as soon as possible, when the doubts are just beginning, that is the time to talk.
Yeah.
Because then you can do it together. You can both you can start small and work through questions together, whether it's becoming stronger and regaining more faith in the church together, or both leaving the church. But if you wait until it's too late, and you are at 100% that you no longer believe, and you still have this spouse over here that has no idea that you've ever had any questions at all, and then you show up and say, I actually don't believe in any of it, that's where you're just letting off a bomb.
Well, and I would say too, like in the case of my mom and dad, it's not even just I don't believe in it anymore at this point, no matter what. Like, I know in my dad's case, again, like you said, he didn't share for so long because he knew it was going to be earth-shattering. And just like Todd's saying, there is the chance that your wife is going to leave you and divorce you over it, right? That's a very real possibility. So much that it took to a point where my dad couldn't deny what he believed any longer before it finally came out. It didn't come to a place where he was just nonchalant and was like, I don't believe it anymore, so now I'll finally say it. Those consequences were still looming over his head that entire time until it came to a point where he was basically straight up asked and had to confront it, and then
Right.
But I will say, I understand why my dad took so long. I understand both sides. I understand why my mom was so upset and why it was so earth-shattering. That whole dynamic I understand. It's one of those where you can look at other people's experiences and you can learn and grow from them. And that, I guess I'm telling that whole story because ultimately for me, when I had my very first question, even though it was small and I didn't think it was a big deal, I did go to Sam because I had seen what not talking to your spouse about your questions and through that journey would do to a family. And I didn't want that to happen to us the same way that it happened to my parents.
Yeah, I feel that we're very lucky, I would say, that we were able to do that together. Back to what I just said, another thing that we have to remember too is that even if a spouse goes to their husband or wife, and even if it's the smallest question at all, and they start going through that together, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to end up on the same page or even in the same book. And so that is a concern, once again, that someone might have, even bringing it up to begin with, that, you know what, who knows where this will end up, and if we can't agree, will this tear us apart? But I think that people will have a higher likelihood of staying together if they are communicating from the very beginning, just from what I've seen.
Yes.
What's this period lasting for? When you start going into the rabbit hole, you're thinking to yourself, things don't add up exactly. You're going deeper, you're having this stress and this pressure of everything that you've ever thought. in the teachings. Now you're not believing.
So I think this started for me in like 2015.
Okay.
The doubts. And a culminating moment for me was, again, the foundation of my testimony was in the reality of this church. I'm a part of this church because it is true that these things happened. That Joseph Smith is and was a prophet of God. The Book of Mormon is the Word of God. So in 2016, with my employer, I went on a business trip to Ohio. A town called Kirtland, Ohio is a famous church history site. That's where the very first Mormon temple was built. There is the story where God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to Joseph and his close associate Oliver Cowdery, and they, in a sense, had their prayers answered and confirmed. So I thought, since Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery received a physical manifestation of God the Father and Jesus Christ appearing to them in this temple, I, at least in 2016, was praying for and hoping for like a spiritual manifestation, something that would tell my soul that all that I've come to believe as a young boy till then is true. I wanted to get my testimony back, and where better place than the Kirtland Temple, the very first temple in the modern dispensation. And I didn't get anything, no confirmation whatsoever. So, but that's the thing, is like, that's what you're trained to do. You pray for answers, and the Spirit will tell you.
Okay.
And I didn't get it.
Where to begin?
So when he talks about the fact that that's what we're trained to do, is to pray. Like I said, we search, ponder, and pray, right? So when in our spiritual journey, when I first started having questions, Sam and I started praying together. And yeah, there's certain ways that you go about within Mormonism that it's a very organized church. And so there's certain ways that you were taught to be able to get answers, just like he said. And, we prayed together for answers to our questions. Yeah. We also went to local leadership, because that's another thing that you're told you can do. We met with the stake. Do we meet with the bishop or just the stake president?
I think just the stake president. Because of the calling I had in the church at that time, it was the person directly above me in leadership was the stake president, so we went there.
Yeah, because typically in a congregation, you have the bishop and then, over each ward, and then there's multiple wards in a stake. Sam was what they call the elders quorum president in our church within our ward. And so he kind of worked more hand in hand with the bishop, and he got his calling from the stake president directly. Right. So that's why we went to stake president. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so the priesthood holder above me would be the stake president. So that's where we went directly to him. And
we went twice.
We went twice. We wanted so badly to gain more faith in the church. At that time, we were so sure of the truthfulness of it. We wanted nothing more than to become stronger members after we had gone through this process and learned more.
And we also went to the temple. Like he was saying, he went to the Kirtland, Ohio temple. And we went to our local temple in St. George. And we're going there because we're also told that, that's the house of the Lord. And that if you are praying and trying to receive answers there, we're literally taught there's no place on the earth where you can be closer to God than in his house. It's literally a physical place where God's presence can dwell. Yeah. And so we went there very frequently also to ask our questions and to pray to God and to try to feel his guidance as well. So when he's talking about going to the Kirtland Temple, that had been a very cool experience. And, it went a certain way for him and it went a certain way for us. But I just wanted to reemphasize that there's certain things as a true believing member that you go through certain processes. And I think if I can say there's one thing that after having left the church that sometimes feels a little frustrating, because most of the time I don't feel frustrated, but is that I think a lot of times the amount of effort that is put into searching and pondering. I know he said earlier that President Nelson said that people who leave are lazy learners. That hurt me a lot as well.
Because
that hurt a lot.
That's just not true.
Because it is just not true. And I feel like more of the people that we know that have left as well, it's the exact opposite. The amount of diligence, the amount of effort that we put in to stay, the amount of asking the right questions to the right people, going directly to our Father in heaven, in his house on earth, according to what we believed then, going through all that. And then when you leave and people say, oh, well, you're just a lazy learner,
or
and we shouldn't listen to you, or you just want to sin.
Or you just want to sin, or you want to have your free days on Sunday. All of these different things that you hear that are so extremely hurtful to us, because we tried so hard. We were working double time to stay in it. We were working double time because we wanted to confirm our faith and to become stronger in the end. And just because the outcome was different, just because we learned more and learned things that we didn't think were possible to be able to learn, even within the church's website and the information that they are sharing that were hurtful, it doesn't mean that we wanted this. We didn't want to leave.
No. So it's very hurtful, like you said, when President Nelson says stuff like that, or when members of the church have excuses, because in their minds they can't fathom why someone would leave, and so they try to come up with the easiest, quickest answers. Oh, it must be because of this. Somebody must have offended. That's another one. People will be like, oh, did someone offend you?
That's a
and
big
I'm like,
one. That's a big
no
one.
one offended me. Like, no one offended me. My word was great. The people are great. Like, I love the people in the church. Like, no one offended me. It wasn't this. It wasn't, but it's also, I feel like people are scared to ask why we left a lot of times. And so no one ever really knows the true reason, because they're scared to ask why. They don't want to really know. And so people make assumptions, and then we're just lazy learners.
It kind of falls into the category of looking in the wrong places. Once someone leaves the church, they are now in a way against the church in church members' eyes. In a way, that's just kind of how it turns out.
That's where you get placed. You get put in this category of, now you're an ex-Mormon, so therefore we don't want to listen to you.
Right, and so people don't really want to go to an ex-Mormon and say, hey, why did you leave? Because now, in their mind, at least a lot of people are told that they're going to receive all of this false information from this outsider or this apostate, this person that has chosen to leave. So, yeah.
Well, and it doesn't help when in general conference, like he said, also told, don't take advice from people who have left. They're lazy. Like, when you get all those labels, and those labels come directly from the LDS prophet themselves, like, I can't blame them for listening, but it is very hurtful.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, I'm doing all these things, and I tell my wife, Sarah, that I'm just going to go to church history sites. It'll be fun. I'm here in Ohio. I can't not do this.
Okay.
But I'm just like reeling inside, like, this is why I'm going. Fast forward to 2019.
4 years.
We moved into a new ward. Basically, in that ward, an older man, he was alleged to be a sexual predator. It was on the news, and it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, for me. I felt at that point I can come true to my wife of my concerns about the truthfulness of the church, but also these problematic issues of what's happening right then in 2019. We witnessed firsthand how the church at a local level tried to sweep this under the rug. And the idea where if this really happened back in the early 80s of this event, how come as members we were never told this? How come does this man have callings in the ward where he was on a small period of time was teaching Sunday school to 12 to 14-year-olds, which my son was in that class at least once, because he was like a substitute teacher, if you will, for a Sunday. That was the cascading event where Sarah and I came together. She knew my concerns.
I'm glad he told his wife.
I shared those concerns. Yeah. She researched, and we as a couple decided to speak out about what was happening. That was totally not acceptable of the behavior of the church. And our local leaders, I feel, were just doing what the top leaders in church headquarters were having them to do. Just cover up, not talk about, have it quietly disappear like it never happened. As a member of the church, you do not speak badly against the church. My wife and I, Sarah, were outspoken. We even were part of a initiative called Thrive, where we invited people who were going through some troubles with the church, like faith crises and so forth. And we would have monthly meetings at our house just to offer love and support.
I believe Thrive is the organization with Mormon Stories, right?
I think so. I've definitely heard of Thrive, but we're not associated or know much about them. So I think so, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of experience or knowledge about the sexual abuse cases. I think I know which one he's talking about here in Arizona. Mormon Stories definitely has more about those. If that's something that you're interested in, you're wondering where you can find out more information about that.
Yeah.
I know that Mormon Stories, and I believe Cults to Consciousness as well, has some of those stories. We don't really cover those stories. They're not really in our niche. But if you're looking for any more information on that, that's where that comes
We hear about these things, but we haven't really done a ton of research to get all of the facts straight.
Yeah.
Our local leader, I think in his mind, had enough where he threatened excommunication.
Ooh, we're going to hear about this.
It's his responsibility to defend the church. And what we were doing was speaking bad against the church. Excommunication is a very barbaric ritual where you basically, like, you're going to court in real life and you go to like this boardroom type room where 15 men sit in front of you, and it's just a barbaric and ugly practice. So instead of that, we as a family decided to take our power back and resign. And with all this, I quickly realized that, in my opinion, there is bigger issues within the church. There's harm against young people, people who identify as LGBTQ. There's just allegations and issues of sexual assault that are happening in the church. So the church is not a safe place, unfortunately.
Can I throw something out there? And I want you to get your thoughts on this one. Whenever you put millions of humans together, you're going to get the sexual predator, you're going to get the anti-LGBTQ, you're going to get all types. How is it different than humanity out of the church in that sense?
I would
That's
say
a good question.
That is a good question.
Because the church claims to be the one true church on the earth and who is led by God. This is God's church. Led by a prophet who we're taught that will not lead his people astray. We're taught that local leaders are called of God. God oversees everything within his church. So the question you got to ask yourself is, if these things are happening under God's watch, and these, in some cases, these allegations are behind closed doors of bishops or other church leaders, how many times should that happen in God's true church? The answer is 0. It should happen 0 times, but that's not the case. Again, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, by their own admission, has set the bar to the highest. They are the one and only true church. And in my view, a loving God who oversees it this close would never allow such harm upon some of his children, because we're all God's children.
Thoughts on that, babe?
Yeah, well, oh man, there's a lot of different ways to take this. First of all, you could say the same about all humans, that if there is a loving Heavenly Father up there watching out for us, why do bad things happen to anyone, right? I don't think that he's going to protect people in this one church, even if it is the true church, and ignore everyone else if he's a loving Heavenly Father. So that, to say that it should never happen within the church, I think that, to Peter's point, you put enough people together, there's going to be the bad people. That being said, because the different callings and the things within the church are we were told were all done through inspiration, meaning that when a bishop is called to the calling of a bishop, he is called by God in their eyes, right? The leader above him receives inspiration from God and is told this person is to be called of God to be the bishop over this ward. That is what was taught. So to Todd's point here, if God is calling this person and knows that this person has these issues, why? Why?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. The only thing I would add to yours is I think most people would agree that within, millions of people in society, if a church member does those type of things, I don't think those are the issues that ex-Mormons have with the church. If it's a random member that abuses whoever, right? Those aren't the people or the situations that ex-Mormons are worried about. It's when it's systemic. It's when the top leaders of the church have bishops say, they tell the bishops, okay, don't tell the police about this sexual abuse case. When it's leadership, I think that's when it becomes problematic. Like you said, if the leaders are speaking to God and receiving direct revelation from God, then they should be on a higher level. They should be on a higher pedestal. We put them on a higher pedestal. When you're in the church, you believe that the bishop is called by God, you put him on a higher pedestal. Yeah, again, why would God put a sexual predator in a leadership position? Now, on the local, everyday member level, I don't think that's exactly what ex-Mormons are really arguing about, because those millions of people can make millions of different choices. But it's the leadership problems, or the way that leadership handles situations.
That's what I was going to say.
Is another one where people say, okay, it's one thing if the stake president didn't get proper inspiration. You can always say like, oh, that person didn't get proper inspiration, or the bishop didn't get proper inspiration, so he let this pedophile that he didn't know about be in charge. Okay, well, that's the bishop's inspiration problem. That's not a church problem, really, right? You can say that. You can cut it off at whatever limb there is. It's, I think, more when the church as a whole, or from church headquarters, or from the top of the food chain, is allowing things to, or when things happen, they're not handling it properly, that it's like, if God's really in charge of the church, then matters should be handled in the best way possible.
Right. And to not turn someone in to the police for something, to try to handle it and say, to sweep it under the rug almost in some cases. That's where the issues are. That, if someone is a sexual predator and the church knows about it, the police need to know about it, right?
Yeah. And
if this type of thing is going on, it can't just be held within church headquarters as, well, it happened, but I'm sure it won't happen again. Let's hide that.
And something to note here as well is that, like, for example, and if this is the case, I'm thinking of in Arizona, a bishop was told about a father abusing his daughter. And in that case, when bishops hear any type of abuse, they call a church hotline, because bishops are not paid. They are a volunteer position, and they're not psychologists. They're not therapists. They're not trained in any way to be in charge of issues such as sexual abuse within a family or physical abuse within a family. These are just men trying to do the best that they can in the church callings that they're given. Yeah. Okay.
In a lot of cases, very great men, by the way. We're not saying that bishops are bad people.
No.
We're just lacking in qualification.
I honestly, my heart goes out for bishops because they don't have those same type of resources to be able to handle really complicated situations that they get dealt in front of them, or they get put in front of them. Anyway, but there is a church hotline. So if that bishop calls the church hotline and does what the church says, they're doing that because they believe that the church is led by God.
Right.
And if that church hotline says, no, because of the, rules and the laws in Arizona, we're not going to report that, that bishop is just doing what his church leaders are saying, and he's going to follow through with that, right? Yeah. And that's when those issues arise of, if it's God's church and the way that things are handed down the line and taken care of can be problematic for people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to think, I mean, I look back and I think, why? Why would the church not turn this person in? The only thing I can come up with is so that there isn't this bad light shown on the church of, hey, there's these kind of people, especially in some leadership positions that are doing this type of thing, that could make the church look like an unsafe place. That's the only reason I can come up with.
Yeah.
And
and that makes them look even worse, because if they're doing it to try to make the church look better over the protection of children, then that starts making the organization as a whole look
when you
corrupt.
Find out that there was someone and it wasn't reported, then that's when it looks really bad. So anyway, yeah, that's just a very touchy and difficult topic to even talk about to begin with, that kind of thing happening. And it needs to be handled.
Breaks my heart.
It needs to be handled differently. I know that there have been local church leaders, I've heard stories of bishops or stake presidents that just handled things the way that they knew it should be handled regardless. They said, you know what? This person needs to be turned in. And in some cases, maybe they lost their calling. I don't know. But they did what they thought they needed to do, and they did it the right way. So there definitely are those people out there that are always trying to look out for the betterment of everyone around them.
Yeah. But then again, to Peter's point, one last thing is just when the church is that large, then it becomes so much more of an organization that you wonder where the connection with God really lies and how much of it can actually be truly inspired by God. Now, whether or not the church claims to have the direct connection to God and be the one and only truth, I think it's the truth claim that people have more of the issue with. But once an organization grows to a certain point, you're just going to have bad apples and you're just going to have problems. Any organization is going to have problems.
Yep.
I could no longer walk away. I could no longer look away. And I can't be a part of the organization.
Okay, most Mormons don't believe in any of that stuff, obviously. Being sexual predators, breaking the law. That's the problem with some of these stories, right? Everything can get lumped up into one person or one group.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Because it's not most people.
Is your beef is the fact that the hierarchy is willing to cover things?
Yeah, my beef is the top leadership. It's not your local member. And you know, the local leaders are in essence trained, taught, and conditioned to do the bidding of the top leadership in Salt Lake.
So you think the top leadership now is fundamentally corrupt, or
Yes.
they've gone off the rails a bit, or?
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, it's their financial decisions, the way that they cover up the bad things that happen, because in their view, what's paramount is to protect the image of the church. That's the most important thing. So.
Okay, sorry. I just had another epiphany moment, because when people say that the church leadership is corrupt, and this is something that I've had to think about because I don't believe in the doctrines of the church, right? Do I think that President Nelson, though he says things that are hurtful to me, do I think that he's a corrupt person? And when they talk about the leadership, I think it comes back to the organization being so big. I don't believe that President Nelson probably ever heard about that, because at this point it's so broad and so big that if they said talk to the lawyers and the lawyers are giving advice, I don't know. I just think that the web is so large now that it's hard to say whether or not the church sweeping stuff away or sweeping under the rug, is that their lawyers? Is that their PR team? Does the prophet even know about those things? Does the leadership of the church? Now, yes, again, the church kind of shoots itself in the foot a little bit with the idea that this is directly straight off from God instead of just a church organization of people doing the best they can.
Right.
Okay. So it's within its essence that it is that way, but at the same time, that's where people can say, but it's supposed to be God's church directly. And so then why could he let things happen? But overall, it still is just a massive organization and quite the web. Yeah. And you have to delegate so many things to so many people on so many different levels that I personally don't believe that the prophet and his counselors, the quorum of the 12 apostles, are bad men trying to do bad things. I personally don't. Everybody can have their own opinion on that based on their own experiences. But I think that the web of the organization of the church is so vast and so large at this point that people doing what they believe is best for the church can go in a million different ways. And I do believe when they say sweeping things under the rug, I believe that's happening. But I think that now it's an organization trying to protect itself more than it even is the religious aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many different hands in the pot at this point, so many different people involved, in charge. I mean, there's members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and members of the 70 that have the ability to make such huge decisions for the church that, like you said, it's likely that the head of the church, or President Nelson at this time, doesn't even hear about a lot of these things. But at the same time, I feel like eventually he will hear about these things.
Once they get big enough.
Once they get big enough. And when those things are heard about, changes have got to be made.
Yes, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Find out who down the line is making these decisions that these certain people don't need to be turned into the police, and make some changes. You know, if we hear about things happening right now, and 5 years later we hear about the same things happening, that's where I have a problem. Because if we're hearing about them in the news, you better believe at that point the leaders, top leaders, are hearing about them at this point.
Yeah, then it's a systemic problem.
Right. But even if it's not their decision to make the bad things that are happening, even if it's not them making the choices to do that, there still needs to be hopefully some big changes made once those things come to light.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it as going back to the idea of it just being a large organization, at the end of the day, the CEO is still always to blame, right? If there's a big enough problem,
right,
the CEO is going to get booted. Now, in a church, in a religion, that's not going to happen. They're not going to kick out Nelson because of things that happen on a smaller scale. But in that same sense, even if the CEO wasn't the person in charge of it, because he is in charge of the delegation of this person and that person and that person, it's still the ultimate responsibility does lie on their shoulders.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they will sweep away and hush the bad things that are continuing to occur in the church.
Is it fair to say, like, if I'm going to make a comparison with that, any big institution or organization usually has a hard time apologizing? An example would be the U.S. government, right?
Good point, Peter.
Most people would think our invasion of Iraq was probably a bad idea. And our administration, any of our leaders have never apologized for that to anyone. They said, hey, we got this wrong. We led you guys into something we shouldn't have gone into. Is there that at play in the church? I mean, I've never been in it. I've never been under this hierarchy, so I'm not familiar with it. Is that a way to compare it?
I would just say that, I mean, for example, Dallin H. Oaks, who's a part of the First Presidency, he was on record saying years ago that as a practice, the church does not apologize. And it's, in my view, hypocritical, because on one hand, you're teaching members to, when you do wrong, you forsake your sin, you repent, you make restitution, you strive to do better, and you admit your problems and grow from it. But you can argue that you're not seeing it from the top leadership. Mistakes are made, but they never take ownership of it.
Those that don't know the 10% tithing, every member must pay. You make $100,000, you need to pay 10, or is it after you pay your federal state income tax, then you pay 10?
Well,
Depends on the family.
That you pay it on your gross.
Okay.
It's kind of, I kind of believe, like, the more you pay, you know, my argument is if you're a millionaire and you pay 10%, $100,000, that doesn't hurt. When you're a family of 6 and your income is $40,000 and you pay 10%, that really hurts. Really hurts. Mm-hmm. Rent, food, clothing, you know, basic medical needs. You know how much money the church is garnering right now. Again, no one knows for sure because they don't share, but it's north of $100 billion.
In some investment fund or something?
Yeah, it's called Ensign Peak Advisors, and it's the investment arm of the church. And my understanding is because the church is nonprofit, they don't pay taxes on their gains, and it's just the unbelievable return on investment that one can get.
And that's just for future temples and whatever else the church needs to spend money on?
I think the church's argument is, these are rough numbers, I believe the estimates are somewhere around $7 billion that the church gains each year from tithing. Their liabilities or obligations is about $6 billion, so that difference of $1 billion goes into this fund, and that's how that money grows. And the church hires the very best of investment bankers to make that money grow.
Okay.
So.
But those numbers you don't know to be exact.
No one really knows.
Nobody really knows.
It's like people who dissect the SEC filings and other public information try to connect the dots. It'd be nice if the church was transparent and told its members.
Yeah.
Because they, again, are sacrificing so much. And if there's nothing to hide, why not share?
I was just going to say that exact thing. I think for church members, when it comes to the money, I mean, the principle of tithing is something that people are very accustomed to. It's biblical as well. And so it's not something that most church members, most people that I know say, you can't afford to not pay your tithing. The financial blessings, the blessings that you get spiritually for paying your tithing. Right. I think the money thing is something that I never really see people who haven't left talk about or care about, because in their minds, I feel like people who are in it, not only are they trusting that the church, they're not giving their money because they're trying to help with this big pot of money. They're not giving their money for anything other than spiritual blessings, financial blessings, and to be able to have their temple recommend. That's their focus. What the church does with their money, they're just trusting they're going to do whatever they're going to do.
Right.
And it's when people leave the church that they tend to have a bigger problem with the amount of money that the church has, because then they're looking at it from an organization aspect. If you take the religion out of the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, then that's when, if you take the religion out of it and you're looking at that bunch of money and you're thinking, why is this necessary? The second coming, I don't think Christ is going to need $100 billion. Personally, there's all these other aspects of it. I feel like those are very, like I said, more focused on if somebody has left. They're going to feel more strongly about those things. Nobody in the church is caring that they have an extra $100 billion.
Yeah, well, what exactly, as far as the church is concerned, but when it comes down to something he said here, when it comes down to the family that's paying the tithing, in some cases, even when the family isn't very well off, they still look at tithing as a blessing, because it's their opportunity to prove their faithfulness to God, even if they are struggling with money. Mm-hmm. I put you first, God. I pay you, and I show you that by even giving you something physical that is one of the most important things in life to be able to survive. I give some of that away before anything else because I trust that you will take care of me and my family. And you'll even hear people say, I have received so many temporal blessings because of paying tithing. Now, I mean, it's funny, you'll hear people talk about the really wealthy members of the church and say, see how blessed they are for paying their tithing. You don't hear a lot of people talk about the very poor members of the church and how blessed they are for paying tithing. But even the poor members, in a lot of cases, and there's a lot of stories, that they still look at it as a blessing to prove their faithfulness to God. And they don't seem to have a problem paying it. They don't seem to look at the organization of the church as a business sense and say, oh, look at all this extra money they have. That doesn't seem to bother them at all.
No, I do like the last thing that he said, though, about the transparency. And I think that goes back to like the truth claims as well, that a lot of the hurtfulness, or as somebody's in a faith transition, normally they always come across this issue, right? And then it's just one more thing to add to the shelf or add to the list of these other things that they've found out. And I feel like it's one more aspect of feeling like you're being not lied to, but the omittance of truth, right? And so when you're going through these truth claims and you feel like there's things that you're finding out that you never knew before, that you feel like they just should have been honest with you, right? And you're dealing with all these other things and you're in this transition and you're just having this super hard time. And then something comes up about the church's money and you feel like it's just one more thing that the church isn't being transparent about. That's when people who leave just feel like it's just one more thing, that why can't they just be truthful and honest about it? Why can't they just come out and be transparent about it? Why can't they just give us a number and be proud of it? Because I know from a very young age, my mom always told me, if someone's trying to tell you to keep a secret, it's because they're doing something naughty.
Yep.
You know, people don't ask you to keep secrets unless they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. I mean, that was just a family life lesson, but I feel like that's a pretty common one, right? That if people are hiding things, it's because something is not right. And you get that same sense as you're going through a faith transition and you're learning historical things. You're like, they hid this. Why'd they hide it from me? It must be because it's not right. And then you hear about the money stuff and they're hiding it still. It must be because something's not right. And there's that sense of it. And it's just one more thing to add and something that just becomes frustrating in that sense.
Exactly.
And so it wasn't until like 5 years ago, maybe, not even 5 years, like 3 years ago, that I found out that other churches have on the back of their meeting note, like when you go into the church, on the back of their programs, they'll show like the tithing money coming in and where it's going. And leave in the comment if your church does that, because I thought that was so cool.
Yep.
Because I've never seen or heard of that before. I mean, it's just crazy to me. I was like, that's so cool that they would be that transparent and share. I think the LDS Church, it's so huge at this point that if you saw the amount coming in at a local level, you'd be frustrated when your girls' camp budget was like so low. You'd be like, okay, how much tithing money's coming in? And we as girls' camp are like having no money in our budget.
Hey, maybe it's time to give those girls a little bit extra money and give them a fun trip once in a while.
Yeah, like the Boy Scouts did, but that's, that's my own personal issue. But no, or maybe the members would be like, we don't want to clean the churches anymore. We see how much money is coming in. Why is every member a church cleaner? Those type of things. So anyway, it's really interesting. We are going to cut this into 2 parts.
Yeah,
because
there's a lot to unpack here. This is
so much to unpack.
In the end, we did not make it to the end.
I know. We thought we would, but we are going to cut it off here.
Yeah.
And because this is just so much.
We're just over the halfway mark here with Peter's video, and there's so much, and we're realizing as we go along, we can't just avoid all of these topics. We have to bring up things about them and talk about them. So we want to be able to continue doing that, and we will do that in the second part as well. Yes, which will come out next Friday. But thank you all so much for listening in, and we just appreciate you all for following us on this journey. This has been a fun video, I think, and hopefully we get people ask us all the time questions about why we left the LDS Church or how we feel about the LDS Church, and hopefully this is kind of shedding a little bit of light on that for y'all. Hopefully this helps answer some of those questions. But thank you all so much for being here. We look forward to continuing this on next Friday and look forward to talking with you soon. We'll talk to y'all soon.